Welcome to Maxability. To unfold different layers of knowledge, stay tuned with us till the end of the video.
A lot, Abin, for being with us here today and help us understand the return on investment for digital accessibility. And for Maxability, with this sixth webinar in a row and the fourth one as we do every quarter, and this will be the last one for 2019. And I'm sure this is going to give a lot of information for our folks here. Yep. To introduce quickly who Abin is, you have already would have seen while registering. Abin has all 15 years of experience in the sales and various leadership roles, and with famous brands like Dell, Wipro, and GE, and many more. We can get more information from Abin as he gets started. And being with, he has the interesting part is that he have worked in organizations right from the startup to the Fortune 500 companies and specialized companies like Deque Systems. So currently he is heading, or he's the vice president for business development at Deque India. And all of you who are in the space of accessibility, I no need to talk more about Deque, the best company in the world for the digital accessibility. Thank you once again, Abin, for being here with us. And
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Rakesh, for this nice introduction. And excited to be part of this event today. Just to get started, as Rakesh mentioned, I come from Deque India, and today I'll be talking about the return on investment of accessibility and the examples of accessibility helping to improve organizations' bottom line. Right. Just to quickly give a quick background about, as Rakesh, you mentioned, people know about Deque, but just to give a quick background about Deque, we are an accessibility-focused company, like a 100% accessibility-focused company, and we are into this accessibility domain for the last 19 years. Our mission, vision, and passion is digital equality. Deque offers kind of a wide range of offerings, starting from products. Many of you might know about Axe, and which is a freemium version of the product, and which has got more than now 10 million downloads. And then we have a test, Worldspace Attest, Worldspace Assure, and Worldspace Comply. Along with that, we also have Amaze as one of our other products. From the services wing, we do offer a lot of services in terms of audit and also validation, and we do a lot of trainings as well for different organizations, training the teams on various aspects of digital accessibility. Now, moving on, a few interesting things to know. More than 1 billion people in the world live with some form of disability. And at least 1/3 of all families are impacted by disability in some way. And the life of people with disability is the same as everyone else, just a lot harder. And I'm sure everyone would agree to that. And keeping that in mind, it's very important to understand what are the return on investment aspects of accessibility, and why should organizations start thinking about mainstreaming accessibility just like they do everything in terms of the software development. So coming to that, we'll now talk about the ROI aspects of accessibility. Now, having an accessible digital presence has positive implications that actually can pay dividends in a number of ways. Now, if you think, one, you can obviously increase your market share, and you can gain a lot of e-commerce traffic because if your site is accessible, you can easily find that via Google search, because the bots which actually read the content on the page will be able to easily read the content of your accessible marketing content. Second, you would be able to control your operational cost, especially in the omnichannel organizations. Then obviously the third thing that you do is you're managing your risk profile to avoid a costly complaint or a litigation. And I'm sure you all know about the latest trends that have been happening. There's been a lot of movement around companies trying to ensure they make their digital websites digitally accessible, and there have been a lot of companies who have been sued but still trying to get things sorted out. And last but not the least, aligning your digital presence with your company's core value. So these are kind of, I would say, the top 4 pointers that I could think of, but I'm sure there are many more to add to this. Now, coming to the next big aspect, which companies would typically think about, that implementing accessibility is a good idea, but what's a market share or what's a e-commerce? Typically, we're talking about what is the portion of pie I can go ahead and get from the market if I'm kind of implementing accessibility. Now, from that aspect, there are a lot of people and money involved, right? If you look at the total after-tax disposable income for the working age of people with disability, that's approximately $490 billion. And for comparison, the African American, it's approximately 501 billion, and the Hispanics, it's around $582 billion. And that typically comprises of around 20 million, which is 35% of the US working age adults. Now, in terms of the money involved and the people involved, I'm also kind of showing a chart here, which kind of talks about various disposable income alongside the various segment of disability. So, for example, people with vision difficulty, that disposable income is approximately around $40 to $45 billion, versus if you're talking about the hearing difficulty, it's approximately close to $80 billion. In terms of self-care difficulty, it's approximately around $5 billion. Ambulatory difficulty, it's around $120 billion. Cognitive difficulty, it's around $95 billion. And independent living difficulty is kind of the major, which touches around $140 billion. So if you think from the opportunity point of view as an organization, that's a huge amount of money which is lying out there, which kind of gives you the indication where the pie is and which portion you can actually claim. Now, moving to the e-commerce specific potential, which is kind of the advantage of implementing digital accessibility in and across your platform. The e-commerce revenue in the North America market totaled approximately $517 billion in 2018. And based on research, 2% of total e-commerce transactions are completed by people who are blind, assuming less than half of 5% of the population. The total available market, that's approximately $10.3 billion. And that's the market size of the e-commerce that we're talking about. Now, moving to the e-commerce specific potential, according to the research, more than 70% of internet sites have critical accessibility blockers. And inaccessible e-commerce retailers are losing out on approximately the $6.9 billion revenue annually. Consumers don't abandon a purchase, they buy somewhere else. So I think that's very important um, to understand that if you're implementing digital accessibility, you have a very good amount of revenue opportunity that you can actually earn for your company, right? Um, there's a fact actually that HomeDepot.com reported an annual revenue of 6.94 billion in 2018. So that's pretty interesting data. Now, coming to the operational cost, all right. So um, now it's important to understand here that how do we fully utilize the digital channel, right? So I'll kind of bring up some examples in terms of taking an example where in an omnichannel organization, it is critical to push work to the digital channel. Now, um, let's understand kind of typically the channel costs of, let's assume we're trying to go through, a company wants to go through 1.5 million transactions for making payment through their platform. Now, if you think from that perspective, typically there would be four mediums through which companies can actually go ahead and do that. One is where a customer kind of walks in and it's a staffed agent facility, and the cost per transaction would be approximately $15. Now, if someone is actually calling in to make a payment, which is again a staffed call center, the approximately cost per transaction is $7.50. If someone mails in a payment, which is a staffed, obviously, mailing and processing center, the cost per transaction there is approximately $2.50. Now, the least cost that a company would kind of pay to kind of receive a transaction is if it is a click-in service and it's a accessible platform. So you're kind of doing a digital website transaction and the cost is just 50 cents. So if you see, there is a big benefit of companies kind of moving things to digital, which is one, because there is a huge amount of cost savings. And two, there is also a big advantage of making website accessible, because then you save all these costs, which are kind of the higher buckets of walk-in, call-in, and mail-in. Now, moving into the next part of it. Now, normally, kind of if you're not accessible and the website is not digitally friendly, then customers would prefer to typically walk in. And I'm kind of taking an example of a 60% customers walking in, wherein the target for a company would be to actually reduce that to as low as 5%, so that they actually save the maximum amount of revenue there. Similarly, for the call-in, the staffed call center, currently it's approximately 20%, and you can actually reduce that, or you should typically target that to be approximately around 15%, which is just kind of reducing it by 5%. The mailing, you should ideally target that to kind of go up to somewhat around 20%. And the actual currently is around 15% now. And the click-in, which is kind of the lowest, which is 5%. And ideally, for a company, that should be the highest target, which should be approximately 60%, where you should hope as an organization that your customers should be able to get most of the payments done digitally right there. Now, let's also look at kind of quickly the costs involved. And we are kind of talking about if it is a 60% walk-in and the per unit cost is $15 for a 1.5 billion payments per month, a company would be spending approximately $13.5 million right there. If it is call-in, then approximately 2.250 million. And then If it is mailing, it's 562 approximately. And if it is a click-in, it's the lowest because it's only 37,500 USD. So, but if you kind of combine without kind of increasing the click-in number and look at an overall cost at this stage, assuming that your platform is not accessible, you are spending close to a $16 million revenue per month, just to ensure that your payments are coming in, which is like 1.5 million payments per month. Now, let's look at if I make my site accessible and if I'm able to go ahead and increase the percentage of clicking by 10% only and reduce all my other channels, which is the walk-in, call-in, and mail-in, by 3%, or I would say 3.33% to be approx. So the immediate transition that happens is you're able to go ahead and save close to your monthly savings would be approximately $1 million, and your annual savings immediately becomes $13 million right there. So this is just the magic of only implementing 10% of click-in, which is where we are talking about make your website accessible, ensure everyone is able to use it. Don't think about making website digitally accessible, only thinking that there is only specific set of users. The whole goal is to be inclusive, and that typically means you're thinking about everyone. And when you're doing that, you're actually reducing your cost on a daily basis, and you're actually getting your company a huge amount of annual savings. Now, moving to the next slide. Internet users who are blind call a company's customer service department once a week on an average because of website inaccessibility. And 90% of interviews reported that they regularly call customer service multiple times to report an issue, even though they have already abandoned the transaction. Now, this is kind of interesting data, and I'm sure companies should definitely think about it. Now, let's come to the other bigger aspect, which is the risk management. And we are talking about typically the complaints and the lawsuits, right? Now, in 2018, in terms of ADA web accessibility lawsuit, there has been kind of a reported explosion of around 181% increase of lawsuits from 2017 to 2018. So in 2017, we had approximately 814 lawsuits, wherein in 2018, we have 2,285 lawsuits. And if you kind of look at the segments of kind of the states, the two standout states for lawsuits, that's Florida and New York. And in both these locations, if you look at the number of web accessibility lawsuits in 2018, it's approximately 726 in Florida and 142 in New York. Average number of cases filed per month, that's 61 in Florida and 123 in New York. And that's approximately the percentage of lawsuits that came from each state in 2018, 32% in Florida and 64% in New York, right? Now, let's also look at which are the kind of segments that got impacted with the 2018 ADA web accessibility lawsuits. The industries that received the biggest focus in web accessibility litigation include the retail industry, the travel and hospitality industry, the entertainment industry, the food service industry, banking and financial, and in addition to that, a lot of self-service industry, right? Where we're talking about the ATMs and kind of digital ticketing and all of that, right? Now, if these are kind of not enough for companies to think about the legal aspects and why they should implement digital accessibility, let's now talk about some of the potential cost of accessibility complaint. So, assuming that there's a blended rate of $120 per hour, call center personnel. So now these are kind of buckets that involve the call center personnel and the call center management, the compliance or regulatory personnels, the product management, the developers, the quality assurance testing, and deployment / operation. Now, we're talking about all of this because these are all involved in terms of trying to fix the issue of accessibility once kind of a complaint has been raised. Now, I'm kind of showing up a chart here where I'm saying, various actions taken by different segments. So kind of the CSO email chat, the part like in terms of the costs, I'm saying there's a total hour involved and there's a total cost involved. Now, in terms of total hours involved, I'm saying approximately for email chat, it's approximately 0.75 hours. The extended cost is around $90. For chat accommodation, it's $180. Documentation of issues, it's around $90. Processing of issues, $180. Spool up fix project, and that's $2,700. Design, $540. Code, $1,080, and so on and so forth. Now, with all of this combined, in order to kind of fix like a proactive fix cost, if this was done earlier, it could have been approximately $100. But now that we are doing a reactive fix cost, it's approximately $10,000 that we are spending, which means with 100 complaints per year and the resultant activities to address could be costing a company as much as $1 million, right? So obviously that's expensive, and you could have got your accessibility things done. You would have spent kind of less than 1% of that. Now, the potential cost of a lawsuit kind of typically goes up to $225 per hour. And that is because the senior company leadership gets involved, the compliance or the regulatory persons get involved. There's an internal legal counsel, internal legal support, subject matter experts, centralized accessibility team leadership gets involved, obviously the developers, quality assurance testing, and finally the deployment, operation, and marketing. So if you see this whole trend, just trying to do reactive fix is actually increasing your burden step by step, versus all this proactively could have actually reduced your cost. Now, the potential cost of lawsuit also, the lawsuit requires new and more expensive resources. The lawsuit demands protracted response, which will be burdensome. The lawsuit involves senior levels of your company, and that's kind of an aggregate risk. And lawsuit generally calls for outside counsel for representation. And again, if you're kind of doing, if you get into a lawsuit, then your litigation cost, and I'm talking about one lawsuit cost, would approximately be $350,000 USD, which again is expensive considering that you're getting 100 lawsuits. It's super expensive. Now, now that we've covered the legal aspect, now that we've covered the part where we are talking about why accessibility should be implemented to get the kind of share of pie from the market with the $6.9 billion revenue available, let's now look at some investment options and the ROI to that, right? So I'll quickly kind of talk about a few things that as DQ we have been kind of recommending there. So one is, obviously we have been kind of talking about that obviously the most powerful technology in the world is the technology that everyone, including people with disability, can use, and technology that can help you build digital platform accessible. And with that, obviously with DQ, we've kind of brought in the DQ tool, which is Axe free, and we want companies to kind of use it and at least ensure that some of the basic requirements of accessibility is taken care of. With Axe, companies do get access to DQ University, from where they can actually learn how to fix it. With Worldspace Attest, Worldspace Assure, Comply, these are all tools to help your organization make your digital platform accessible. The other aspect is that we have seen, that Apple, Google, Microsoft, they're creating technology, and they're creating technology accessibility inclusive. And DQ is super proud to also be part of the Microsoft DQ partnership, where we are now also working towards ensuring that Microsoft is able to integrate Axe and bring out Windows, which is also accessible. We've also been talking about kind of the concept, which is shift left. And we've been talking about kind of moving into that phase where you go ahead and implement digital accessibility right from your design phase. Don't wait until things have been moved into production and then you kind of try to fix it, because we've just seen that the cost of reactive fix is much higher versus if we implement accessibility right from the design phase, which is more of a proactive approach, the cost is much lesser. And at DQ, we've actually designed products which actually fit into each cycle of the shift left mechanism, which starts from development, where you can use Worldspace Attest. In testing, you can use Worldspace Assure. In production, you can use Comply and Amaze. And these are all to ensure that you're constantly being inclusive and you're constantly being able to ensure whatever development is happening, it's happening in compliance with accessibility. Now, obviously, we all understand that technology is the lifeline for communities with disability. And it's important that every organization truly understand people's challenge. It's typically also very, very important to think about accessibility from the very beginning, right? And it's also important to go ahead and lean into latest technologies, because that is where every organization will find solutions and find easy ways of implementing accessibility, and they would be able to mainstream it rather than thinking about it as doing it at a later stage. Now, I quickly wanted to also talk about some of the alignment with core values, and these are some of the right things to do for an organization, right? It's important to kind of think and say that we're here to help, and that's because we want the life to go right. It's also important to kind of also think from the aspect that a company can kind of put a core value to say you are in good hands. Life is better when we are connected, and accessibility and being inclusive can bring that to the best. Companies should definitely think about their client interests always comes first. And I'm sure every client in the US market would definitely want accessible solutions. Obviously, one, because they want to be inclusive, and two, they want to comply with the US guidelines. And it's important at this stage that companies come forward and they lead the way. Specifically, all the bigger organizations, they should definitely come forward, show the way that we have implemented accessibility. We want people to be inclusive, and that's where I think the change will start coming in. And I think where there is a helpful smile in every aisle, that's also very essential, because then it gives a truly inclusive feeling, and so on and so forth. And our vision to be the Earth's most customer-centric company, I think that will come only if you are able to go ahead and implement accessibility, because that's where you would give a brilliant experience to all your customers. Um, Finally, coming towards, if your mission is to be inclusive, connected, customer driven, simple, helpful, and customer centric, how can accessibility not be a part of that? Right? And I think this is where companies need to think that it's truly very essential to always think about all these items, I would say, which is being inclusive, being connected, being customer driven, being simple, being helpful, and being customer centric. A group of top CEOs say maximizing shareholder profits no longer can be a primary goal of corporation. It has to now eventually start becoming an inclusive, like inclusivity should be the primary goal. And social justice, these are also kind of now important, and it's kind of on the rise, right? Tech companies, when they go out into the US market, they face pushback against contract with immigration and border control agencies. Retailers face calls to halt firearm sales. Increasingly, vocal calls on social issues, right, like racism, LGBTQ plus equality, people with disability, equality, ageism. All these are kind of all these are on the rise. So again, we are talking about being inclusive, and digital accessibility is definitely a part of this whole process. Consumers, they kind of increasingly look to spend money with companies that share their views, right? And how would you kind of say that the company shares their views, the customer's views, only when the company is kind of thinking around digital accessibility and being inclusive, because that's where you're giving the right message to your customer that we care for you and we are there for you, and we are kind of doing everything to ensure that you get a brilliant experience by doing business with us. So that's kind of the thought on the digital accessibility part of it, and what is the return on investment. Having said that, the final piece, in case you want to go ahead and connect with us, our Twitter handle for DQ is @DQ Systems. And in terms of reaching out to me, you can always reach out to me on my Twitter, which is @ABINCHOUDHURY, or email me at abin.choudhury@dq.com. With that, I kind of open up the session for any questions and would love to answer that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abin, for a wonderful discussion. Open up for questions. If you have any, please feel free to ask Abin, or you can also drop in an email to him.
So my question is, now that you've now that you've understood and sold the idea of why it's important, right? You don't want to have any lawsuits, or you don't have, and the cost is greater if you don't begin with accessibility. What's the first step to being the loudest voice in the company for accessibility and kind of guiding others? What would be the next steps, I guess?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So typically, I think now that I've given you the background of the ROIs, Most of the management would only kind of think about accessibility, like why should I spend on accessibility? Because they're just thinking about the smallest share of business that they would get, but they feel that the cost involvement is much higher. Now, if we are able to paint this big picture to them, that hey, you need to understand that this is the cost that you're investing now and being proactive to ensure that you're actually bringing in huge savings for your company in the long run. Two, you're bringing in more customers who were not able to go ahead and access your platform. Now, for any company, they are spending $1 million in marketing just to get certain percentage of customers coming and using their website or their mobile application. The moment you have made your website accessible, you're automatically pulling in customers without your additional marketing costs. So if the business understands the logic of what's in for me and what am I spending and what am I getting back, I think that's where the biggest answer is. Now, if you also kind of give certain other examples to kind of say them that, hey, we are building accessible solutions, just not for the business, which is obviously the most important part, but we are also building accessibility for our future, right? Think about it, that as we age further, we would need solutions that are easy to use. Now, how would you feel that if you're in a situation where you're not able to use the most crucial application that you use as of today, and if it is not accessible? So I think it is more of a relation that you need to kind of tie in examples of saying the revenue advantage and also kind of related with certain personal empathy, and kind of then put this message across saying, this is why you need to implement and ensure accessibility is taken care of. Obviously, the legal aspect is there. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
And do you have any recommendations to how to bring up the ROI for an enterprise level where it's not necessarily new clients, but more enterprise software for, like when we do our timesheets and stuff like that kind of software. So not really gaining new clients, but more improving the experience for people who don't actually purchase the software.
Yes, absolutely. What you can definitely do is just drop me an email note and I will send you some information that would be helpful for you to present across.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
And what's your email again?
Yeah, it's Abin
Okay.
.CHOUDHURY @deque.com.
So sorry, DH.
U as an umbrella. RY. R as in Romeo, Y as in Yankee.
Okay.
@deque.com.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So I'll also probably introduce each other. I do have both of your email addresses. If
thank you.
for some reason, if you could not get through, I'll do that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really like the examples. This was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure. Sorry. I think if I'm hearing something in the background, but I don't know if it's a question because the voice is muffled. You can put the question on the chat as well. All right, if there is any other questions, please feel free to let me know. We'll give it a minute. And Obviously, anyone can email me any doubts, any questions. I'll definitely make the presentation available, as well as we'll share the recording. So anyone who wants to kind of use that, you're free to use it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Abin. I think that's it.
Perfect. I think I've got one
question from
I think I've got one question in terms of any steps to improve the IDE. Would just want to understand a bit more on the IDE part of it. Rakesh, do you have any clue on that?
Justin, can you? I think you can talk. You're on mute. I believe it's unclear. So are you talking about the ID app, or what do you mean by IDE?
Right. That's what I'm trying to understand.
Oh, he left the meeting. I think he could not.
Okay. Yeah. So Rakesh, maybe you can just
Sure.
connect me and Justin as well, and I can answer his question as well on that.
Absolutely. I'll do that, Abin. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot for being here today and for your time.
It's my pleasure, and thank you everyone for joining, and wish everyone Happy New Year in advance, and have Merry Christmas ahead, and have a great vacation.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching and being with us. Please like and share the video. Don't forget to click on the bell icon. And also, for more updates, subscribe the channel.